Welcome everybody to today's webinar with Andy Bradshaw from UK Coaching. We're thrilled to have a conversation about what's happening over in the UK with coaching and coach development during these very unusual times. We've got a couple of exciting webinars coming up in the next couple of weeks. Anna Swisher from USA Weightlift is going to talk about what they've been doing in the coach support space, and a dear friend of mine, Michelle DeHayden from Australian Gymnastics, is going to share a little bit about what they're doing in terms of the uncertainty with regard to preparations for the upcoming Olympics. So we've had a cracker of a lineup over the last few months. If anything's been good about COVID, it's been we've been able to get people like Kristen Betts talking about some of the neuro myths that transfer through education to the sports space, Sarah McQuaid on getting better, and Chris Snyder from the USOPC talking about the future of coaching. So Andy, I'll hand it over to you to talk to a little bit about the context of what you guys have been doing with UK coaching, and particularly lessons learnt with the online space, and love to hear a little bit about some of the innovations the things that you've tried, because I think that's the one thing that I've noticed with the events that I've been a part of, that you really are testing the online space and challenging yourselves and everybody involved to see how we can make the best of these very unusual times. So first of all, welcome Andy, and why don't you just give us a bit of an intro of what you've been up to lately?
Yeah, so I suppose a quick intro to me. I've been at UK Coaching, which was Sports Coach UK before that, for just over 15 years now. So quite a long time, a number of different roles, and most recently, sort of past 3-4 years, been looking at supporting coaches. So evolving what we in the UK are looking at in terms of a more specific coach developer role. So very much focused around supporting coaches with coaching practice, in situ observations, feedback, not discounting all of the other areas that might be included in a sort of more mental role, but definitely looking at focusing on practice, and some of the pedagogical knowledge that we need to underpin that, and then what that role then looks like. Other sort of part of my job, or part of my interest, has been coaching, field hockey coaching. So been involved with the England setup prior to the birth of 2 of my younger children. So for, again, 20 years worth working in the age group squads, boys and girls. So in terms of our UK coaching offer to coaches, when lockdown came around over here, which obviously turned everything virtual pretty much overnight, or certainly in the space of a few weeks, we were very aware of how are we going to support coaches, and then how are we going to support coach developers as well. So I thought what would be useful is just to share a quick sort of spin of a bit of a tour of what we've been doing. So I'll just share a few slides, talk over them, and then just open up for Q&A. It certainly isn't something I want to be talking over slides for any particular length of time. But let's see if we can get this going. Bear with me whilst can you see that okay?
Yep, all good.
So this is a bit of an amalgamation of all of the different offers that we did. So Time to Learn has been an event that's happened online previously. So once a month, we run, or have run, an hourly session, continuing to run. And that was probably not our only online offer, but it was almost the thing that we'd explored prior to lockdown, and then gave us a little bit of a framework to say, well, actually, we can start to use some of this and inform some different things. So Curious Coaches Club was the free offer that we developed, just from the need to, for us, definitely from a UK coaching point of view, to be front and center of how can we support coaches, how can we provide some learning for them, but also probably what comes across the most across all of these things is how do we help coaches to make sense of the learning. So this has probably been a common thread of across all of these different pieces is it's not just the provision of content, it's the creation of spaces, sense-making spaces, whether that's virtual in terms of a space where people can get together and talk, or using other mediums, whether it's online forums, to try and do that sense-making bit. So Curious Coaches has been an online weekly 1-hour event where we've invited guests in. We've tried to make it quite conversational. And then off the back of that, we ran 2 what were called communities of practice, but we'll start to explore what do we actually mean by that. But 2 sessions where people could come back later on in the week and talk to each other with a facilitator from UK Coaching about some of the content that they'd heard and what it meant for them, possibly how they were thinking of applying it. Similarly, when you move across to the right-hand side, Coach Developer Conversations, that was a bit that I led on in terms of we've had coach developers coming together in physical 1-day workshop type spaces pre-COVID and pre-lockdown, where we would come together. An expert might, an academic might present some research that they were doing in an area, or a coach developer might share and some examples of good practice, and then we'd workshop that in terms of people getting into groups and making sense of things. What we've tried to do is take that online, and that's where I'll get to in the slides coming up, is how we sort of created that social learning space. The other bit was bottom left-hand corner, playing around with more podcasts and different formats. So our online offer sort of evolved into a number of different ways: some conversational content, some expert-driven discussive content, some things that already existed and some things that we added in. So that would be an example from Monday or Friday just gone, of a Curious Coaches session. So bringing in Robin, who's done some academic research around parents and families in sport, Heather, who's one of our staff members but is a parent of 3 different children who are doing different sports, and then Jennifer Owsley, who's Lily Owsley's mother, hockey gold medalist in Rio. And we would pull them together, have conversations, frame it, but we've been exploring a variety of different things. Some of those have been led by stuff that's come out. So reacting to Athlete A, that was a session that we put on. Reacting to The Last Dance. So some topical stuff and some things that we know are relevant to our coaches through all of the other bits of research that we've been doing. Just skipping on. So going back to the coach developer work that we did, at the outset of all of that, we as in internally, but also as a collective group, probably be very mindful that the coach developer population is probably a little different to possibly when you bring in together coaches that don't necessarily know each other and might be on different stages of their coaching journeys or learning journeys. The majority of people within this group were quite experienced coach developers, and that not necessarily just how I described it before, but might be coach educators, might be mentors, and weren't always in sport as well. But what we wanted to do right at the outset is create a space for them to come together. And the bit at the bottom, so if you're not familiar with Etienne and Beverly Wenger trainers' work around social learning spaces and communities of practice before them, that little quote from one of their pieces of research, really looking for those genuine interactions. So people being able to take from the space, but bring to it as well. So bring to the space their experiences of applied practice, their experiences of their practice, but also themselves in that practice. And I think that was the crucial bit, being able to genuinely share, well, this is what I found, this is what I felt, this is what I've been paying attention to. So that the 4 images and the statements above it were some of the things that we talked about across the first 3 or 4 weeks. What does making a difference actually look like in our space? How do we effectively engage the coaches that we work with, but also ourselves in uncertainty? What are we paying attention to? Obviously, there were lots of things that we're paying attention to in terms of uncertainty throughout lockdown. You know, how are our coaches feeling? How are we feeling? What roles might exist in 6 months' time? because certainly there's plenty of roles that are now starting to have a huge amount of uncertainty about them as people come out of lockdown and implications for all of that. But the final bit, the bit that has the UK Coaching logo alongside it, is genuinely, do we want to try and make a difference? And people seem to really buy into that, which meant that what we've ended up doing is creating a really genuine space, which people are interacting in a very open and trusting way. We've sort of evolved psychological safety in that, but bearing in mind we've had 23 hour-long sessions, of which we've had a core amongst most of that. A few stats, mainly because I used this in some reporting recently, so I had a slide already made up. We've run 23 conversations, mainly on Friday mornings. What's been great about the virtual space has been able to spread our wings. So we've had, obviously this is a connection with Cam's come from, and Sarah, who's on this call as well, I think, reaching out to the US, to Australia, to New Zealand. So where timings have permitted, people have either had a very early morning or a slightly later night, depending on where you are in the world. And we've explored on the bottom one some of the asynchronous, synchronous balance. So who can join live, who can catch up on recording, and actually where we might have a range of people joining us on a particular session, whether that's 10, 20 or 30, we averaged out about 25 to 30 per session, but we've had lots more people access that content. So that's been an interesting balance for us. Next couple of slides, I just wanted to show you how the sort of things evolved. So after probably 7 or 8 weeks, we wanted to try and provide a little bit of structure, or a loose structure, which enable people to sort of plan what they might be getting themselves in for over the next month. And we tried to shape that around using an article or a paper or a research paper to stimulate some discussion. The second type of session was trying to generate some discussion from within the group. So that was the third one. We had some really experienced practitioners, some of whom are doing their own research, and we wanted to really encourage people to share that and build that sense of network. And we've called it a coach developer family in the past. Genuinely look at people sharing what they're doing and building on that. There were some bits around our identified learning needs and wants. So one of the sessions just prior to lockdown, we talked with the group about actually what do people want in this coach developer space. And then we thought we might explore some guests coming in, what that actually looked like in reality. So this was July. We found that we needed to give people a bit of space to reflect. So it became quite, I'm sure people who are on my mailing list were getting quite, not anxious, but probably, here's another email from Andy saying I need to read this paper prior to Friday, collate my thoughts, be willing to share some of those thoughts. And this was almost a weekly occurrence. So, and obviously if you're sharing a paper or you've got a guest like Pierre on, and we were looking at trying to stimulate some questions for him, it started to become, and we were very mindful that obviously people coming on these sessions are busy people. So we wanted to build in a bit of open space for reflection. So although that's positioned as sort of the first one in July, it pretty much finished off what was happening in June, and then we restarted again. Derek was one of the members of our group based in Scotland, and he'd been doing some research on coach burnout and dropout and anxiety and stress. So he shared that master's research. Andrew Abraham and another colleague from Leeds Beckett shared the On Vampires and Wolves paper from actually quite a while back, but what we built on that was some more recent research around that. And Pierre came in and shared some of his work around personal learning coaches. So that's how things evolved. I think I've got one more. So this is my final bit of a slide. I just wanted to show you how we structured a session. And for me, the academic paper discussions were some of the most interesting and stimulating ones that we ran. So what we do is, we discussed internally what is out there that we think coach developers would find interesting. So Lauren and Chris's paper from a couple of years back now, see the title there. What we wanted was our group to share their reflections, and for Lauren predominantly, Chris was on the call as well, but for Lauren, who's the lead author, to just listen to those reflections. So genuinely give space for our audience to make sense of it and to share that sense making with the author of the paper. And I think we had 8 or 9 of these sessions throughout, and almost to a person, each of the authors was hugely positive about that experience. I think some sound bites would be, we write these papers, but we never know how they're received particularly. And yet we've given them space to actually hear. These are practitioners who are wrestling with. So some of the things in this paper talked about power dynamics in reflection, and perceived and actual, and how that plays out in terms of different roles in coach education, where you might have someone running a coach education course and then providing a support mechanism, and how do the people involved in that program see the differences in terms of those roles, and what happens. Also the elements of surveillance, again, perceived surveillance. If a tutor is sort of circling working groups or talking about do reflection, actually what reflection is supposed to happen? It's supposed to be good reflection. Who's the reflection for? Is it for the coach educator? Is it for the people involved? So that first section was just our reflections. There was a bit of space for Lauren just to reflect on that, not necessarily to come back at it with any answers, but just say, well, actually, this is what I heard, and then genuinely just open it up, hopefully, as we are going to do now, open it up to a Q&A. And that was where we got into some really, really useful conversation around, well, actually, this is what we know of in practice. So on that particular session, we had someone who was a rugby union coach educator, and he's like, well, actually, this is what I've seen in practice. That really connects to me. This is what I've seen. This is what I've felt. How does that connect in? And obviously then the academics are able to see, well, actually, this is what is happening in reality. So whistle stop tour. I feel like I've been speaking too quickly and throwing lots of stuff at you. So I'm going to stop sharing and invite some either thoughts from Cameron initially, or anybody else. I've got some notes here about some of the other themes that we can explore, but just generally intrigued as to what people's reflections are so far.
Yeah, love to hear. I think anyone that wants to jump in, just unmute. I'll keep an eye on that. I'll kick it off, Andy, because I think of the sessions that I've been a part of and what you've done, the one thing that strikes me is the dynamic of the group. And I think for many of us on the call that are jumping into this space where those that you're working with may not know each other, and so how have you guys sort of work, even those coaches that know each other within the groups that you're working with, how have you developed that sense of trust to be able to engage the group and make sure that A, the learning is individualized, but B, there's that trust that they can open up that conversation and show a little bit of vulnerability?
Yeah, I suppose I sort of glibly dropped in, oh yeah, we've developed some psychological safety. And I think it was just, we were very mindful that this was going to take a little bit of time. So when I talked about, particularly with this coach developer group, and that's the one that I think I will be able to give more practical examples. And I've just seen that Jenny, one of my colleagues, works with different groups of coaches in some slightly different formats. So I might bring her in. So I invited her into the conversation just to share what that developing trust thing feels like with people who genuinely don't know each other from different sports. But for the coach developer group, when I shared that, so that slide that I had in terms of social learning space was part of session 1. So we spoke quite openly in terms of me as the facilitator and UK coaching as the facilitator, although that's, I think, has challenges within it in terms of an organization facilitating a group, and what people's perception of, right, well, who and why is this being led? But hopefully we managed to sort of mediate some of that with saying we want to try and create a space for people to come together and share. So session 1 talked about, well, what does Wenger Trainer talk about social learning spaces that are slightly different from community of practice. If you delve into his work, when he talks about learning capability and learning citizenship and social artistry, we spoke at length about that and actually what that looked like. And we did that over the next 4 sessions. So spent some time talking about what are the types of behaviors that we'd like people to engage, not we'd like people to engage with, but how are people going to engage in this space? What's going to make it effective? And I think by doing that, it enabled people to see that it's not just a one-way thing. It was a two-way conversation or a multi-way conversation that we were hoping to open up. UK Coaching was not just broadcasting some stuff on Coach Developing. We were genuinely looking to bring together however many people and from whichever sort of environments to come together and hopefully to have sight of some content which might be interesting to them, but give them space to connect with each other and share that. And I think that was, in terms of the facilitator role, and I've been reflecting on that quite a lot over the past month or so as we're sort of coming out of lockdown. Again, the perceptions of power when you've got 20 or 25 faces on a WebEx or a Zoom call, and some people might want to talk, possibly because there's an ego at play, possibly because they've got an agenda. Some people might just want to listen because we were doing this on a Friday morning, and we were mindful that coach developers in lockdown they weren't less busy, they were probably more busy, but in different ways. They might just want a space just to chill out a little bit and just listen to some conversations. So again, there was that mindfulness of not demanding engagement and not assuming that because people weren't contributing that they weren't really finding a lot of use out of it. And I must admit, I found that difficult because, you're as the facilitator, you want to try and get questions or you want to try and get discussion happening. But, and there were a few times when we were left with, sort of the tumbleweed blown across. But again, I always found it quite stressful, actually, managing that or trying to manage those situations because you're unsure of what's going to happen. You're unsure about how people are going to engage. And I think that's probably more prevalent in groups where, as I say, they're less experienced, they may be earlier on the coaching journey. You might get a bit more just general sort of like talking out loud because maybe people feel a little uncomfortable and they'll speak but maybe not think. Generally, this was quite a sort of a thoughtful group. And as we went through, actually it started to become more of a challenge, not shutting people up, but actually keeping it to an hour. We started to extend things to 90 minutes because genuinely people wanted to chat. Can I bring Jenny in? Can I just so Jenny, you there? And can you join us?
Yeah, go for it.
There we go, Jenny. So she's from the other end of the country, speaking from down London way. Jenny, that question about trust and developing trust with the coaches that you work with, how have you gone about it?
Yeah, the big T. It's been interesting. There's 13 different sports that are on the particular program I'm involved in. And what we've learned over the different iterations of the program is that they're all coming not only from a different coaching background and experience, but level of support that they've experienced. So a couple of the C's that I've documented in the last kind of couple of months, I guess COVID has given us some space to think about this, has been clarity from the start on what the expectations and boundaries are, has been really important. The high performance space that they function in is, it's got these invasive eyes on them all the time, and in their eyes like an assessor judgmental kind of angle. So it's clarity on what my role, the program, the boundaries of that. Consistency in the language used, the message, and our rules of engagement, or how we operate on the program. And then the care part, as Andy mentioned, is so vitally important to build trust in it. Some coaches, when I spoke about their support, some have never been supported, or maybe it's perceived that they've been given some opportunity to, but the care in understanding their well-being angle, how they approach their coaching, and not just diving straight in to the coaching practice itself. And there's the word challenge, but I would like to balance that with a calmness around it. So going at their pace. Andy designed the program in kind of blocks, and on our first review, or our main review of the second cohort, near the coming to the halfway mark, we realized that engagement period that we'd blocked for a certain period of time actually needed to drip the whole way through for some, and others could hit the ground running. So yeah, I think the care, them seeing that we really do care about their journey, the progress, their engagement, and what they get out of it, but care around everything, how they operate in general. So those were some of the things that we felt brought the richness out. And then we had different projects like the workshops, and how we delivered them tried to come away from the mainstream delivery of and their experience, and link them kind of with each other and us in that, and that seemed to add some beautiful kind of flourishing relationships across sport, and and how they felt valued and a sense of belonging to that group.
Yeah, I think there's already so much to unpack. You guys are. I warned a couple of people. You guys are going to put like 4 or 5 hours worth of content and topics into the hour that we're together. The one piece I'll start with there is the care in coaching conversation that I was actually a part of with Colin Cronin, and I'll advertise that one to anyone that can access any of Colin's work, because I think so much of what we talk about, and you mentioned the word care, Jenny, we focus on the care of the athletes. And I think the care for coaches is definitely the theme that you guys are definitely living. It's not that you talk about it. And Sarah, I know you've got some experiences on both sides of the pond. This is a difficult one for me, guys. This is a full disclosure as an Australian to be upfront and say, yes, you guys are doing probably the best in the world, other than the New Zealanders. And that's even harder for me to say. But Sarah, I'll hand it over to you to sort of make it, connect some of the dots here.
Who are you handing over to, Sarah, or back to me?
I was going to hand it over to Sarah, but
I could see her. She's just leaning on her hand, and she's definitely, disengaged.
I have to say congratulations to all of you at UK Coaching for what you have managed to accomplish in the last 6 weeks. And having stood in your shoes 20 years ago, which seems impossible because I am actually only 27. But and I look at the offer that we had for coaches, which was a real, and that hangs there, Andy, all summer long. Actually, the pin. It's not just there for show. It's my finest put it on, for everybody when I'm barbecuing. But when I look at the offer that we had in place for coaches, which was really driven by the formal education agenda and the legislation agenda, and actually what you've built is a really needs-led, quite eclectic raft of opportunities for coaches to engage in any way, shape or form that they wanted to. So my hats off go to you, and Cam is absolutely right, and it galls him more than it galls me, but you have done a phenomenal job of A, pulling it together, B, soliciting the content, moderating it all, but also just giving people a space to learn.
Cam, something that we had Sophia Jowett join us on, it was part of the program that Jenny works on, so Performance Foundation is a program, and we've done some virtual webinars as part of that. She was talking about coach-athlete relationships, and the final statement, sort of her takeaway message, I think, is hugely relevant to this conversation as well. So she spoke about coach-athlete relationships, or the relationship just being an organism. And what nutrients does that organism need? So a dynamic relationship. What nutrients did it need to be successful and to thrive? And I think you take some of that metaphor into what we've been doing. Some of the nutrients that we've looked at. So there's a variety of. I went off on a random gardening metaphor at the end of that workshop, which did not work, and I sort of dug myself a hole. But, you know, when we were talking about actually, you know, we've got a variety of different mediums. We've got a variety of different stimuluses. We've created spaces for people to make sense of those, hopefully. And I think we're being creative about how we've tried to do things and not necessarily taking some risks, although we have played with some different software, which has been interesting, some of which has been you know, more useful than not. But I think that also enables with a coach developer group who will also be facilitating sessions themselves. I thought it was hugely useful for us to actually just role model a bit of that and explore some different ways of doing things, and also, as you would do in a coaching context, explore the vulnerability of that. You know, we're trying something here, it might not work, but we're going to have a play with it and, you know, come along for the ride type of thing, and let's see where we get to. And that has been probably one of the most some of the nicest feedback that we've had around the sessions, that people have found that actually, you know, it's become part of their Friday morning routine. You know, they've cancelled other things to do it. You know, they've got up ridiculously early in the morning if they're over your side of the water. So, you know, that type of feedback, when you set out on something you're not quite sure how it's going to land, has been really well received.
I think what you've also done, particularly because all of the sessions I've been involved in, and thank you for the 3 months I found myself back in the UK, it was lovely to be welcomed back into the family, having been absent for a wee while. But I think, certainly speaking from my own experience, I've taken as much away from you around not just what in terms of the focus of the content, but how to facilitate it. Because I think we're all pivoting to this virtual learning space, and we're all really attempting to understand what's the best way to continue to facilitate learning in these environments. And you've modeled a fairly eclectic mix of opportunities for coaches, which I think everybody, regardless of where you are and what the focus is, can learn from and integrate into their own sessions.
And I think following on from that, Sarah, just to get a little more concrete, because you touch on it a couple of times, Andy, is what have you learned in terms of platforms? I mean, we're using Zoom right now. I feel like I've tried the gamut, but can you give us some concrete takeaways in terms of, you know, some of the other platforms you've used, you know, the upside and the downside, without it being a full promotion for Zoom, because we're not being paid for any of the promotions here.
Well, it's definitely not going to be a promotion of Zoom, because we haven't been able to use it over here, just because some of the very, very early security challenges, our company said, well, actually, that's not a platform that we're going to use. So and also because we've committed from for quite a long time to using WebEx, so Cisco products. So we've explored using WebEx events, Teams, and meetings. And more recently, their updates on particularly breakout rooms in meetings, I think. It is meetings, isn't it, Jen? I'm looking for a nod there. Because my early frustration in all of this was, how can we do sessions that we want to have breakout spaces? Zoom was the best version for that, and the cheapest version, and quite a lot of the time the most reliable version. So we explored some different things, which was fine. So we explored different ways of doing it. Interestingly enough, prior to WebEx's update, their breakout rooms didn't have video. Now that created an entirely different dynamic, one of which felt like you were in 1980. But what it meant was that the people reflected back that they had to listen a whole lot harder, and it broke the cycle of just sat on video the whole time. And actually, they quite liked that. I didn't so much, because it's like, if you're running something, let's make sure it's slick, and that was far from slick. We had a play with Ramo. So Ramo is a virtual conferencing, so it's set up to try and recreate the feel of walking into a conference, like a conference hall, where you would obviously have a number of tables, and as you join Ramo, it actually, your joining page is a series of tables, and you decide, you click on a chair at a table or a sofa at a table. Some of the graphics are quite nice. And then you're on that table with 4 or 5 other people. And you can choose to move at any time. So, you know, in the same way as if you decided the person you sat next to in a conference wasn't doing it for you, then you just get up and move. From a control point of view, that was interesting. If you wanted an element of control in what was happening, we also found, you know, just some little logistical things. So if a table is full, you could have 6 on a table, and no one else can join that. So you have to wait for someone to move before you could join. So at one point, as the facilitator, all the tables were full, and I was sat sort of in the lobby thinking, well, what do I do now? Because I couldn't join any tables, which was a bit weird. And it was set up from a sort of a keynote presenting way. So you'd almost start a keynote, but that would cut off all of the table conversations. So there was a bit of like, I have the power God complex in terms of I can just stop people's conversations here and start, which in terms of the informality that we were trying to promote through everything else that we were doing, it was great on one hand, but not so good on the other. What we've probably come to realize is that no platform is perfect for everything that we do. And what we've been trying to say, certainly internally, some of our internal discussions have been, we need flexibility in terms of what platform we try and use for what medium. So if we want something with breakout rooms, then we use the best thing for breakout rooms. If we're wanting to create more of an online community space, then do something else. Don't try and sort of shoehorn it into something like the only product that, and obviously flexibility and adaptability is something that we've all had to do throughout this period, and we've probably learned some quick lessons around that. So yeah, it's almost working out what's the best format for what you want to achieve, but bearing in mind, I don't still think there's anything out there that does everything perfectly.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that can, I think I've heard that from a lot of different folks trying to do what we're doing outside of the sport coaching space. I think what you've highlighted is there's the individualization of how do we give the learner and those involved in the environment the opportunity to take out what they're looking for, but then there's also the social element. And I'm curious, you touched on it as well in terms of the spacing. You know, how is it appropriate to have that breakout group directly after a keynote? Does it make sense to have a couple of days off or a week off in between to read and reflect? And I'll share with you just one quick story of a conversation I had with Matt Wilkie, who's at Irish Rugby, and he was really interested in what coaches have learnt from the lockdown with some of the high performance coaches. And a response from, you know, a lot of researchers that we all know and respect said, just hold off on asking that question of what are you learning from something, because we're in the moment of the experience. So I'm curious how you guys have navigated, because you've done all kinds of different things, whether it's exploring the learning in the moment, giving it days, weeks in between to sort of allow the learning to unfold. So tell us a little bit about, I mean, I don't think there's any secrets here, but just sort of the different learnings that you've seen with the things you've tried.
Yeah, I'll probably start off with an example from the PF project. So I'll bring Jen back in on that one as well. So for our virtual webinar offer, we haven't been able to get out and see these coaches. So their experience of our program is very different to the previous two cohorts. We wanted to offer them something new and different. So we quite deliberately structured a 1-hour session that was relatively content heavy. Not that there wasn't interaction, but we decided, well, actually make sure that if we're bringing an expert in, that they will talk about what they're expert in. And I'm just mindful that my small people are just arriving back in the house, so we might get some interruptions here. Sorry, where was I? Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy. I was going to say to everybody while you collect your thoughts, it's birthday week in Andy's household. There's a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old birthday. That's why there's advertising in the background there. So back to you, Andy.
So yeah, we made sure we designed our content specifically to say, well, actually, if we're bringing an expert in, let's get you talking about what you know and what you're expert in. Let's ensure that there is some discussion, but not loads of discussion. So we opened up. Hello. Thank you. Got some feathers. Look at that. Eloise, I'm just chatting at the moment. Can we?
Do you want me to jump in, Andy?
Yes, Jen, can you jump in?
You a little bit. So what we decided to do after those Tuesday sessions was have a space we call it a debrief, or a hot debrief space for them. And again, the considerations were, on any given day during this period where we don't have those maybe social cues or face-to-face opportunity, is pick a duration. So we went with 20 to 30 minutes, left it open, and the coach developers would then have an opportunity to go to a platform that suited most, just sign in almost straight after, get a refresh and come and join. And what we found in our reviews was that Mark, one of the other coach developers, took questions from the coaches during the session, maybe some that were in the chat box to the expert or come from the coaches, and used those as a prompt. I chose to just have an open conversation, facilitate that to see. But the important part was the confidence has been built from the program and the space that we created virtually. So they had a voice, they felt like they had a voice. But the important part that I felt out of all of the webinars was the ability to contextualize. That was the space they had allocated that time so they can continue to commit to it. And it didn't seem like an overload. Andy and I spoke numerous times about, is it the right time? Like you said, Cam, should it be a day apart, a week apart? But we had the opportunity to then engage further with people. As the role that I'm in, I can, call them or they can call me, and we can have a chat about something that's landed or something they tried to apply or further rumination. So that time was really precious, and we got a good attendance to it. Sometimes people joined from different spaces. I guess, some preferred having a question up to nudge and prompt. Others preferred to have that space and go, right, here's my random download. But I tried to prevent, as I went further through it, I tried to be very mindful of the language I used and not say, what is your key takeaway? What's your summary? Because as you said, they're still in that experience. And when they finish that, then that's when we kind of got the gold a couple of weeks later, even a month down the line, when they're saying, oh, that Jim Aframo session, the way he phrased that, yeah, I really like that. And that wouldn't have been prompted by me. So that's been a really useful exercise.
Yeah, no, what it brings to mind is an interesting one. We've talked about it with a lot of the national governing bodies over here, and I think Ken Martell at Hockey has explored probably more than any of us in terms of that spacing, and whether it's a week apart, 2 weeks apart, a month apart. It's almost the dynamic of the group, because I think we've all found that different things work with different groups. And I think one of the things that Andy, you and I've talked about, even within those groups, of how do you, as a facilitator, as a fellow coach or coach developer, how do you be involved with those conversations? Like you say, Andy, as a facilitator, and you let everyone go to the breakout groups, and you're sitting there where in the face-to-face, you're able to jump in a room or be invisible. But when you're in a room, you're in a room. When you're not in a room, you're not in a room. So how do you facilitate? How is, from a organizing perspective, how do you facilitate the conversation, but without being too involved, but also being completely removed? I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, Andy.
Yeah, again, we played with some different ways of doing that. So you're right, the frustration of send everyone, when you click the button, send off the breakout rooms, and then it's like, right, well, which one do I join? And then does me joining, does the facilitator of the session joining a conversation immediately change the nature of that conversation? possibly not so much in our coach developer stuff, because again, they were fairly experienced, and we built that element of trust that Andy's not coming in to judge what's being said or to monitor. That surveillance thing that I talked about earlier, but that would definitely be something to be conscious of with other groups. But what we explored was, could you nominate or ask someone to volunteer from a group to feedback? The challenge there is when you do the feedback sessions out for a group breakout, how long does that take? But also, we were quite mindful of, you then get one person's lens on that conversation, one person's view on that conversation. So we start to steer that as well. We had a play around with linking into different mediums as well. So we have an online forum called Connected Coaches, which is a UK coaching platform for all coaches to discuss coaching topics, challenges, posting blogs, all sorts of different things. But across, going back to Curious Coaches as one format and coach developer conversations, we established forum groups to say, if you've been on the conversation, we will have an online thread where we can share the video, we can share any supporting resources and generate some conversation there as well. So what we were then able to do was start to this balance between the synchronous, asynchronous learning. So who'd been on it live, who'd got some things that they'd made sense of live, but maybe not shared, who could then share later on in the week on a forum. It wasn't perfect by any stretch, but what we've been, playing with is, what are the different methods? So in Jenny's program, we've got WhatsApp groups with a small groups of coaches. The level of sort of open debate within a WhatsApp group over the course of an 18-month program, and with slightly different ages of coaches and just their ability to actually engage in a WhatsApp conversation, possibly more than going online and putting something in a forum. We've had some fantastic reflections and sharing of ideas and connections within messaging rather than within sort of posting on a forum board. We played with someone listening into a conversation in a breakout room and then sharing the summary of that conversation on the Connected Coaches. So you had people being able to pick up on what breakout conversations were like. And another way that we've done is copied chat conversations within the chat box of WebEx and anonymized it, and then put it in the forum as well. So that means that people can start to see, well, actually, when we've gone into some depth and people are sharing either their experiences, because we found, again, that bit around who's willing to unmute themselves and share in front of everybody else, or who's prepared to put something in a chat box and maybe retain a little bit of, not anonymity, but they're not quite prepared to actually speak out loud. And so that's where actually sharing some of those conversations and anonymizing them has been, we can still get the range of conversation, and we're able to share that. So to show where threads have gone, possibly where they've started and where they've got to. Can I pick up on Tom's comment there? We found, and Jenny's giggling away in the background there, because we had to, particularly on this program that we've been running for the last 2-3 years, we evolved the program, so its iteration from cohort 1 to cohort 2 and now to cohort 3 has been, we've changed like the first 1 or 2 interactions, because we felt that they were not unable, but less able to engage in the style of support that we're hoping to provide for them. So we have a PhD running alongside our program. Some of the initial findings of that are, and it links to some of the work that Anna Stodter and Chris Cushion shared with us in one of our sessions around people's biography and the culture of coach education that they might have been through within their sport. And obviously with our program, we've got a whole range of sports, some whose coach education structure might be still relatively traditional, maybe a little bit outdated. I'm being kind there. And what we found, and what Nikki, the PhD researchers, early findings have been their ability to engage in a more autonomous program, which we're trying to support coaches to travel their own journey. We're trying to support them in engaging with uncertainty, what I mentioned before. How they do that is something that a lot of them are very unfamiliar with. And that links to Tom's point about, well, reflection. How does someone reflect? So we have supported them in terms of almost like not a how to learn workshop, but our first session has been around, actually, this is what we're going to try and do. And this is how we're going to try and support you in engaging with the content, engaging with a coach developer. Again, there's been some really relevant and useful feedback to us on the program around, I actually found it quite difficult to engage with this support person. You know, I was assigned a coach developer as part of the program, but actually I almost didn't know how to engage with them because I'd never had that before. Others were like, this is brilliant. I've never had anybody before, so this is fantastic. But in terms of stretching and in terms of reflecting on content, so the research area that I've linked to Anna, Simon Phelan is also doing, I know Sarah's shared, actually, how have people engaged with online learning? That's a fascinating question to pose, because I'm sure there are plenty of coaches with lots of notebooks full of notes that they've written on online content, but how are they translating that into action? What process have they gone through in terms of reflecting on it? Does it fit? Does it not fit? Have they just discounted it because it doesn't fit their worldview? So have they tuned into a webinar but just turned it off because it's, they find it uncomfortable? And why haven't they been able to sell through that? Why haven't they been able to engage with that wrestle in terms of uncertainty? So yeah, absolutely, we found the need to support coaches in understanding the value, the purpose, who it's for, possibly introducing some tools and methods if they're unfamiliar, but genuinely the supporting process. And again, understanding that whilst you're unpicking a lot of what they might have gone through, maybe over a number of years, 10, 15, 20 years, they've been ingrained into doing something a certain way. And then we're suddenly saying, well, okay, come on, you're going to become an autonomous learner now. It's like, yeah, that has been a real challenge.
Yeah, look, you're almost inviting yourself back for a second crack at this, Andy, because the change in culture, whether it be a discussion that we all have about the difference between certification, coaching education, coach development, and then coach support, but even underlying that is the identities that we have face to face as opposed to online. And I think what we're all willing to share, say on a WhatsApp group that's completely isolated in a group where there is some trust built, through to say a Facebook group, through to some of the other social media platforms, it really the evolution of all of our identities, whether it's as a facilitator, someone new to coaching, new to coach education, or trying to figure out coach development. I think there are so many layers to this thing that we're all, quite frankly, I think all trying to unpack and figure out, okay, we know a little bit more now, but we probably have more questions than we have answers after conversations like that. So as we're sort of getting close to the top of the hour, thoughts on where are we headed? Where is this thing going? And what are you guys sort of trying to prioritize as the next steps in supporting coaches and supporting coach learning?
I think where we're possibly, as we come out of, well, although we're coming out of lockdown, we're possibly going back into it a little from some of the recent statements from our Prime Minister today. There's definitely the mixed model approach. So what are we going to be taking that's really worked? So even just reflecting on our coach developer conversations on a Friday, the space for people to come together and just network and create that learning space for them to connect with each other. Download some of the things that have been happening in their world, because again, they're all busy people, but they're applied practitioners, so they are learning from each other, but giving them a little bit more space. So our thoughts around that is probably going more fortnightly, maybe lifting the more expert-led sessions to maybe a little more infrequent, but building some stuff around that. So rather than trying to sort of almost shoehorn the expert delivery into an hour session on a Friday morning, we'll actually say, well, we can expand that a little bit, maybe do a couple of 1 hour sessions, maybe not even have those live, record it with someone, get out of the stress of, are people going to be able to connect? Are people going to be able to share their content? Let's just record a really high quality 1 hour set of delivery, and then our live stuff is possibly more around Q&A, conversations, or sense making. So it's that balance between, I know you shared the US ice skating conference model around, recorded sessions to stimulate discussion, and then the live sessions are the more sense making spaces or keynotes. What it has definitely enabled us to do is draw in experience from around the world. So, the ease of connecting with, say, Cliff Mallet from Queensland, or with Pierre, or with yourselves, that's where I think we need to continue to leverage what the virtual space offers for us. But decide, it goes back to a little bit about the platforms. What's the best use of our time? So for coach developers, providing them with an hour's space just to come together and chat informally, that's absolutely what we should be using the virtual space for. If we're going to come together as a coach developer group, then we possibly now then start to need to look at, well, what's the difference in value? So if we can establish some applied practice sessions where we can say, right, okay, well, let's get into a university, let's watch a session, let's have a look at some coach behavior coding, let's actually bring that to life and say, this is what the physical space can offer us. And we do that in person, and we continue to use the virtual space for what it's become really good at, in terms of bringing people together in the comfort of their own home, where they're not having to travel, where they don't have to commit, where we can bring people from around the world together. That, I think, is where we're looking at, but working out which bit fits, and how, if we're going to do something face-to-face, it needs to be different, it needs to be better, it needs to add a bit more value, rather than just returning to what we've always done.
No, I mean, you touch on the exciting learning that we've been able to capture in terms of the things that we'd never have discovered if we hadn't have been put in this place. And what comes to mind is, as you mentioned at the outset there, the Wenger trainer research on social learning, and you mentioned communities of practice, but their value creation framework, I mean, you essentially just summarized each of the 7 areas of what they're looking at in terms of the impact, whether it's immediate impact, which is, that's the general, well, I went to this session, we spent an hour talking to a bunch of people with accents, and I learned something brand new, cool. But how that evolves into, are you willing to try something different? Are you willing to take a risk, and, risk connect a greater connection to community, evolve your own identity, and really looking at that transformational aspect of the learning. I think you guys are really providing an example for all of us to be able to, if there's anything that people take from this call, I think it's what are you willing to try different? What are you willing to take a risk and see what comes of it? And I think that for me is the, one of the many takeaways of what you guys are doing. So I'm respectful. We're right at the top of the hour, and don't want this conversation to end, but mindful that people have to run off to other things. So I'll close it off now, but stick around for a little bit for anyone that wants to hang around. So Andy, Jenny, thank you very much. Sarah as well for your contributions.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me, us. And yeah, more than happy to rejoin, even if it's, as to share some of our thoughts, or just to listen in. That's been really useful. Thank you.